And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Greetings, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Tuesday, May 21st, 2024. And we start out this Tuesday afternoon looking at the sea ice. We've noted that it's been a very gradual melt-off here across the northern half of the Bering and along the southwest and west coast of the state. We've had below normal temperatures all spring long, and that trend will continue up through the end of May. No real changes coming here along areas of the Bering and southwest coast. Temperatures will average below normal, but a slow seasonal melt-off will continue. We have areas opening up and still some shore fast ice in areas along the lower Yukon Delta, but again, things are just slowly going to improve as far as the ice finally beginning to melt off. Though we're still dealing with just the tail end there of the Yukon River, still having the potential for some ice jam flooding there from around Mountain Village downstream through Imanik and along the immediate lower Yukon coastline. Late tonight into early Wednesday, low pressure will be moving onshore in the vicinity of Nunavik Island, Etolan Strait, right there around the YK deltas. This system will come inland. Secondary low will develop along this triple point in the front. Not a strong low, but it's just going to keep areas of rain and rain showers going along the Gulf Coast that'll push into the Panhandle Wednesday afternoon and especially Wednesday evening, Wednesday night, lingering into Thursday, and yet another low approaching the western Aleutians from the North Pacific, taking a very similar track as we go through the week. So this pattern will uphold itself as we go through the Memorial Day holiday weekend. So by Wednesday afternoon, here's that little secondary low frontal system approaching the Panhandle, pushing more moisture there in through the Panhandle for especially Wednesday, starting Wednesday afternoon and especially Wednesday night, lingering into Thursday. The initial low there pushes inland and just kind of washes out, and then here comes the next system impacting the far western Aleutians Wednesday afternoon, and by Thursday, the first system just kind of falls apart as a trough lingering along areas of the Panhandle, eastern Gulf Coast. We have weak thermal low here in northwest Canada, some scattered showers, isolated thunderstorms popping up with the daytime heating, pretty typical pattern. But then here we have the low crossing the lower Bering that's going to take a similar track into the southwest interior here by Friday, which is going to give the southwest Alaska Peninsula a wet start to the very beginning of the holiday weekend. And then this system is going to work its way east with another secondary low forming here in the Gulf. So it'll keep some more showers going here along the Gulf Coast here as we go through the holiday weekend. So in the meantime, this midweek, kind of a mixed bag of winds across the inner channels to about 10 knots, waves just a couple of feet. Outer coast, we're looking at south to southeast winds turning more easterly, 25 to 30 knots, especially once you get around off of Sitka, all the way back through Cape Suckling, with swells building from 8 to as high as 12 feet there off of Cape Suckling. On Thursday, the inner channel winds turn more southerly, 10 to 15 knots, with waves 2 to 3 feet there in the inner channels. The outer coast, look for northwest winds to 20 knots south of Sitka and off of Craig, with swells of 7 feet. Westerly winds generally right around 15 knots off of Sitka all the way up through outside of Yakutat Bay and Cape Suckling. For the northwestern Gulf, strongest winds will be around Hinchinbrook entrance off of Kayak Island, easterly winds to 30 knots, swells 8 feet. East winds to 25 knots within that wider expanse of Prince William Sound, with 6-foot swells there. Northeast winds upper Cook Inlet, but down through Anchor Point at about 15 knots with 3-foot waves, and then turning southwest at the entrance of Cook Inlet to 20 knots with 4 or 5-foot swells. On Thursday, winds will generally have a westerly component, Prince William Sound and Cook Inlet, but variable winds around 10 knots here, tucked away up into the northwest corner of the Gulf. Strongest winds westerly 25 knots here at the entrance of Cook Inlet, lower Cook Inlet, with swells of 5 to 6 feet. Winds on Wednesday from Kodiak Island down along the length of the Alaska Peninsula will be generally southwest to west, 20 to 25 knots. Swells on the North Pacific side, 4 to 6 feet. On the Bering side, 5 feet, 4 or 5 feet within Bristol Bay, but as much as 6 to 8 feet, especially north of Cold Bay. And generally some sort of south-southwest component to the wind here for Thursday, 20 to 25 knots around Kodiak Island, and generally 20 to 25 knots as we get down through the lower Alaska Peninsula. Swells 4 to 7 feet on the North Pacific side and right around 4 feet on the Bering side, with maybe a little lighter wind to 10 knots from the south into Bristol Bay. Across the Aleutians, we have that other low that's going to be approaching the western Aleutians. So way ahead of it, we're looking at west-southwest winds 20 to 25 knots over the eastern Aleutians, becoming more southerly, and then south-southeasterly to 35-knot gales, Kiska westward to Shimia. And on Thursday, look for generally southwest winds, 25 to 30 knots, eastern Aleutians, picking up to 35-knot southwesterly gales from around Atka and Adak back through Kiska, though they will try to turn more westerly there, Kiska westward. And looking at the southwest coast, look for 20-knot southwest winds into Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays, westerly winds to 25 knots around the Pribilofs with waves 6-8 feet there. Northeast winds out of Norton Sound, 15 knots, turning back toward the northwest, approaching the north side there of Nunavik Island, with still some areas of ice in place, but the water gradually opening. And for Thursday, we're looking for south winds of 20 to 25 knots into Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays. Look for southwest winds, 25 knots around the Pribilofs, but with that front that's arcing out ahead of that low back toward the central Bering, northeast winds to 25 knots around St. Matthew. And then kind of offshore, southeast winds along lower Yukon Delta, 10 to 15 knots, though southwest in the wider expanse there of Norton Sound at only 5 knots. Winds through the Bering Strait on Wednesday, generally north at 10 to 15 knots. Look for easterly flow to pick back up off once you get north of Cape Lisburne, Point Lay, Wainwright. Easterly winds to 25 knots, and then generally easterly winds along the Arctic coast right around 20 knots. And then for Thursday, look for northeast winds 15 to 20 knots along the Arctic coast from Kaktovik through Utqiagvik, turning east-northeast along the northwest coast, Wainwright down to Point Hope, and then turning back down to the north-northwest in the lower Chukchi Sea, just north of the Bering Strait. But once we get onto the west side of the Seward Peninsula to the north side of St. Lawrence Island, winds will generally be out of the northeast, 10 to as high as 20 knots there just north of Gambell.